next speaker that I'm going to announce is Narjes Boufaden, founder and CEO at Keatext. Artificial intelligence is transforming every walk of life, from banking to telecommunications, social media to e-commerce. But as with any technological advancements, each development comes with questions and challenges about ethics, diversity, and inclusion. Since AI mimics human cognition, do these technologies reproduce the human biases observed in the society? Narjes has a vision of a world where AI helps organizations and companies foster harmonious relationships with people they serve. She founded Keatext to offer a disruptive platform that helps brands leverage customer feedback to create powerful customer experience.
So, being a woman entrepreneur with an immigrant Muslim Arabic background in the AI tech space, I had my share of anecdotes and cliches that come with the combination of biases that are attached to all these attributes. So today, to contribute to one of the most important and impactful discussion in AI, diversity and AI bias, I will try to bring a different perspective to how AI can help mitigate bias and contribute to building a better society. So, artificial intelligence is already changing society at a faster pace than we realize. This is not always as visible as robots or self-driving cars. In fact, most of the time, it's algorithm embedded in the technology we use every day. It's impacting our lives, habits, behavior, steadily as it sneaks its way into critical industries such as transportation, entertainment, retail, financial services, or healthcare. Most of the time, we enjoy the benefits of AI, though. So think of applications like Waze, which helps us navigating the traffic to get to our appointments faster. How many times Waze helped me make it on time to my meeting because it suggested me routes that I never thought of to avoid heavy traffic. Think of Spotify, that learns our music and listening habits to create personalized recommendations to explore new songs that we would probably enjoy. It can even suggest music with the right beat for my morning jogging. Or Amazon recommendation engine that shows products I might like using my clicks on the site and comparing them with other customer selection. So using AI, it was possible to streamline the browsing and checkout experience, helping me place order faster and move on with my busy day. So AI can assist us in achieving our goals faster, easier, and more effectively. But the truth is, AI technology is an incredible achievement because it can mimic human cognition and decisions at scale. So how did we and why did we end up surrounded by AI scandals, such as women tossed away by Amazon's recruiting tool, minorities denied mortgage by financial institutions, or chatbots being taught hate speech by their users? So in this talk, I will try to answer three important questions. Is unfairness the result of human or machine? How do we get the most out of AI without reproducing bias? And can we make AI learn the word as we wish it were, instead of the word as it is today? So let's start with the first question. Is unfairness the result of human or machine? This last 2 decades, we've witnessed scandals that have shown that AI can be biased in the same way that the human brain is or can be. We learned from these scandals that AI models can not only learn to reproduce the same biases, that exists in our words. In fact, it is deploying them at scale. The implications can be devastating, especially in sensitive areas such as HR, with matters such as hiring, criminal justice, or healthcare. If we are letting our own human biases into the artificial intelligence we create, can we really blame the AI? So these algorithms have the power to make choices on their own. But at the end of the day, they are human productions. So as I talk about the many ways in which bias can be introduced in AI, you will see that it's not so easy to draw boundaries between the role of human and machine in creating bias. So first, I'll start by understanding how we develop AI models and the stages in which bias can be introduced. I'll be focusing on one particular scandal surrounding Amazon recruiting tool software to provide some examples. So in 2014, Amazon has been developing an AI to optimize the hiring process by automatically sorting through resumes and ranking candidates. Nearly a year after its launch, Amazon realized that the AI was tossing out resumes for women candidates. So Amazon shut it down in 2015, but it still reveals today how easy it is to introduce bias into AI. So let's have a look to the first stage of the development of an AI models. So the first place where bias can be introduced when developing AI models is at the data collection stage. Data is the input that is fed to the AI. It's the information it uses to make a decision based on a combination of criteria. So why is data so important in potentially creating bias? It's because this is the representation of the word that as human we provide to the AI model. And the AI model will make up criteria to make decisions based on that representation. So let's take the example of Amazon again, which was dismissing women candidates. The AI model was trained on resumes that Amazon received over the past years. Unfortunately, the majority of these resumes were for men. The world representation submitted to the AI model so it can learn decisions criteria was mainly represented by men. So the AI model learned to recognize good male candidates and coded to recognize female candidates because its representation of the word didn't account for women. In other words, the data it used was skewed to favor men. Now, bias can also be introduced at the data preparation stage, which involves selecting attributes for the algorithm to consider or ignore in the decision-making process or training stage. Again, in the case of Amazon recruiting tool, engineers taught AI thousands of terms that appeared on the resumes. Terms that held the most significance for the AI algorithm were verbs such as executed, captured, which were more common on men's resumes. So in addition to skewed data, the attributes provided to the algorithm weren't the ones represented in female resumes. This means that the selection process was creating another layer of bias, part because the skewed data that was fed to the AI model, but also because the attributes or features used to prepare the data for training purposes were selected using a process that by definition was prone to introduce bias. Then in the third stage, which is perhaps the most complex to improve, as it's the pure result of mathematical and statistical algorithms. So at the training stage, it's hard to explain and audit the logic of an AI model decisions regarding fairness. Most machine learning algorithms are black boxes. which means that we do not know the inner mechanics they use to make predictions. The algorithm selects and uses attributes that will optimize the model and reduce errors. But as machine is not, it has no social awareness of the attributes it selects. That means it cannot have any regard to fairness. So again, in the Amazon case, the discovery that the recruiting tool was dismissing women and basing decisions on gender was only one piece of the problem. So not knowing how the bias was introduced made it even harder to correct it. And that's why Amazon ended up shutting the tool down. And now finally, the last stage where bias can be introduced, is the validation stage. This is where humans are involved in assessing the outcomes of an AI for fairness. So for instance, Amazon tool was not used to evaluate candidates, as we've explained a bit earlier. It was simply providing recommendations which were assessed for fairness to determine the success of the AI model. So without any validation of the results, if there wasn't any people involved in that process, the discrimination would have been replicated at scale. So it is at the validation stage that outcomes can be analyzed and fairness assessed, and this is a place where people can have a strong weight in deciding whether the model is fair or not. We've been talking a lot about fairness. But trying to define what is a fair prediction or decision by an AI model, it only brings up more questions, such as who decides what is fair? How does we measure it? And at what point do we say this AI is fair enough? So to explain the complexities around these questions, let's look to another concrete example. In 2013, researchers at the University of Washington discovered that women were not shown as often as men when searching job titles like CEO on Google Images. Even though 27% of CEOs were women at that point, only 11% of the image results showed women. So in this case, the question would be, what is a fair person that Google images show? Is it 27%, the actual number of women CEOs back then? Or should it be 50%, provided that it would be a fair answer, even if the real world at that time wasn't showing that statistics? So at the end of the day, we are responsible for the presence of bias in AI. But with so many possibilities for the introduction of bias and the complexity of defining fair outcomes for an AI, the path forward is not all clear. But at the same time, we want to move forward with AI technology because we know that the benefits can be huge. So how do we get the most out of AI without reproducing bias? Perhaps technical solutions are not enough, and we need to focus on a human element in AI, building a more diverse community of AI professionals who will change the status quo and the approach used to the issue of bias with new perspectives. As we mentioned in the Amazon recruiting example, the lack of diversity and perspectives had a devastating impact at each stage of the process of the AI development. And in these technical challenges, the human element cannot be understated. And that's why many groups, such as Microsoft Fate and nonprofits like AI for All, are already working to increase diversity in the AI field and even in other spheres. The idea is that people from diverse backgrounds are better equipped to recognize understand, and engage with bias, and ultimately build an AI that achieves fairness. So if Amazon have worked with a more diverse team of engineers in building its recruiting tool, we can imagine a different scenario, one that doesn't end with a scandal. This kind of team could have foreseen that building the AI model of a majority of men's resume would become a problem further down the road. So far we have answered our first two questions. Who is responsible for unfairness, and how we can get the most out of AI without reproducing bias. Now, let's get to our last question. Can we make AI learn the word as we wish it were, instead of the word as it is today? To answer that question, we will need to start by rethinking our approach to the issue of bias in AI. Can we accept that bias in some ways is inevitable or very difficult to overcome? If we know that bias exists in AI, instead of trying to remove it, perhaps we can find a way to use it to impact the society in a positive way. For instance, we could skew the data used to build AI models so that these models ultimately cancel out their own bias and achieve a fair result. An example of this kind of approach that is already being developed is counterfactual fairness. It tests a model's predictions against a counterfactual word, where sensitive attributes, like gender, for instance, that are prone to bias are changed. A fair model would make the same decisions even with these criteria changed. So again, if we apply the counterfactual framework to Amazon recruiting tool, for example, we would reverse the gender attributes in the data to train the model to become insensitive to the gender and give women an equal chance. Now, if we can take this idea a step further to make AI better represent the word as we wish it were, not simply the word as it is today, how would that look? Well, this isn't something new either. Keeping up with the hiring example, in order to give women a fair chance for representation in C-suite positions, many companies and institutions are putting in place explicit rules to maintain a 50-50 representation of women and men. So by creating and enforcing demand, we are opening up a world of possibilities and providing opportunities for more women to have an equal chance to contribute. Moreover, beyond skewing the data used to build AI models, we could envision a whole different way of developing AI models, each built and optimized to serve different social considerations and diversity, altogether working to eliminate or compensate for biases. In such a case, no single AI would ever make a decision alone, but instead, it would be part of a committee, weighing individual decisions, combining results to better capture specifics, and preventing the bias of one model from impacting the entire decision-making process. So altogether, we've seen how both humans and machines can introduce and contribute in fairness. AI can improve our lives at scale, but it is a two-sided coin because it can reproduce bias too, even in a more damageable way. Even though it's our responsibility to solve the problem of bias in AI, the very idea of ensuring a fair outcome brings into question much more than technical solutions. Knowing all this, could we think differently about the bias that AI can introduce? Is it possible to use bias to positively impact society? Could creating AI models biased to generate positive outcomes to minorities be a temporary solution to accelerate positive changes in our society, restore balance, and compensate for all history of unfairness? And most importantly, Is our society prepared to take that leap to change the tides of diversity? So, thank you.
Thank you, Narjes. They were excellent questions, which gave us food for reflection and good to leave our audience with. Our time is up, but we'd be glad to have you again speak at our event. Thanks a lot for this really interesting presentation, and I really loved the insights of it. Thank you very much. Stay with us for
Thank
the
you.
networking if you have some time, and see you.
Thank you.